3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're all as happy as one can be this Christmas. And we're going to discuss today the situation in Israel. So apparently, we're going to have the fourth election in 2 years in Israel. And this is what we're going to discuss with the capitalist, the scholar, and as always, impeccably dressed Jonathan Hoenig, but also the Lord Emperor behind the scenes. Today is going to be the Lord Emperor on the forefront of the scenes, or however this is called. So we have with us Razi Ginzberg, who definitely has things to say about Israel. Now, to be honest, my relationship with Israel is having read Netanyahu's book about Israel in the Middle East some years ago and thinking, well, there's a politician with some principles who understands what it means to be guided by ideas. Now, people who know him better are telling me that this is a misunderstanding. The only thing I can speak confidently about Israel is the great work that the Greek manager is doing in Maccabi Tel Aviv in the basketball, in EuroLeague, but I assume most of our viewers are going to have no idea what I'm talking about. So probably that's all the contribution I have for today. So Razi, why don't you tell us a bit more about what's happening in Israel?
Well, I have a little bit to say about Maccabi's EuroLeague performance this season, but we'll leave that for another episode. So, so yesterday it became official that Israel is going into its fourth election within 2 years. That's going to happen on March 23rd. So first, I think we need a little bit of background about how the Israeli political system works. It's a little bit different from what we know in the UK and in the US, and those are different from each other. So Israel has a parliamentary system. There's one chamber of parliament. There's no, House and Senate or House of Commons and House of Lords. There's one house, one chamber, 120 members of Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and they're elected in a proportional representation system, which, many people in countries that don't have proportional representation seem to think that that's the best way. Now, what is proportional representation? It means you vote for a party rather than a candidate, and you vote, the party has a list. So, and they get the proportion of the vote in seats in parliament. So to give a Nikos friendly example, let's say you get 10% of the vote, and out of the 120 seats, that means you get 12 seats in parliament. And that means your list, the party's list, gets the first 12 people on that list into parliament.
For people who didn't get the joke, Razi claims that I'm not as good in maths as I am in hopefully applying an objectivism priest to camera affairs, but let's continue.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty non-controversial statement. But anyway, so yeah, you get whatever proportion of the votes you get in number of seats. Now, here in the UK, we have a parliamentary system with a different type of voting system, and even though in the past decade we've had a couple of coalition governments, it's not a usual thing in the UK, right? In the UK, usually one party gets a majority of seats and they form the government. By the way, for our US audience, you don't get to vote for the leader. The leader is the prime minister. We don't, well, there's a president in Israel, but it's a symbolic, figure. He doesn't have any power. So the prime minister is the head of government, and he does not get elected directly by the people. You don't get to vote for the different prime ministerial candidates. You get to vote for a party. Then some party has to form a coalition government. Now, you need a majority. You need 61 votes in parliament for your government in order to have that government ratified by parliament. Now, in the 23 elections for parliament in Israel, the total number of times that one party got a majority is 0. So that has never happened. It has always been a coalition government. And coalition government, basically what it means is one party, almost always the party with the most seats in parliament, has to buy the other parties. There's There's no other way of putting it, which is why, for example, the ultra Orthodox Jews in Israel have, much more power than their proportion, in the population. They they are often the kingmakers, and they can, that gives them negotiating power, which is why their education system is very well funded by the taxpayer, mostly those taxpayers who probably would not send their kids to that system. Yeah, Nikos, you have a.
So you are saying that they're the natural allies, if I understand well, of the right. So Likud governs with the religious orthodox. Is this?
They do, mostly, but they have, sat with left-wing governments. Basically, if you give them money for their indoctrination or education, system, then they will be on your side. So, and of course, it's not just them. There have been all sorts of weird political parties throughout time that have, managed to yield this power. So, proportional representation sounds great. Like in the UK, we have the first past the post system, and so you vote for, your local MP, and in many constituencies, the majority of votes are, not for the person who gets elected. So most people who vote don't actually have their, preferred choice in parliament, whereas in a system like Israel, the vast majority of people get at least some of their people into parliament. They do get, um, past the threshold, which is, I think, 3.25%, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, you need 4 seats in parliament to make it into parliament. Yes.
Can I throw a question here to both of you? So, wouldn't we, who are a minority in politics, who are people with views that are not going to be majoritarian anytime soon, shouldn't we welcome this system? Because think about it this way. Let's say we know our friend Mark Pellegrino, for example, has made an attempt with a political party in a representational system based on maybe his charisma or a good campaign. He could find himself in the parliament. So from what you say, wouldn't we say that real radicals like us should be cheering for this just representative system? I mean, just in terms of it gives you justice, in terms of it actually represents the population in the parliament. Shouldn't we be looking forward? Yeah, maybe you'd have 5 Marxist-Leninist parties, but also you could have a party which is closer to our views, and then we can make an educational political campaign, and that would be good for us. What am I missing here?
I'm just waiting for the translation, Nikos, to go through so I can understand exactly what you were saying. But okay, good, I got it. No, I'm kidding, of course, my friend. I mean, look, very interesting perspective. I think it highlights, even among semi-free countries, the difference in government. Although, Razi, I have to tell you, from an American perspective, you're lamenting the fact that there is no agreement in government. You kind of can't get a coalition together. And from an American perspective, we, at least I think a lot of American objectivists, celebrate that. The most prosperous periods in American history have been periods of that kind of political gridlock. And in fact, a lot of the American system is designed, I mean, we call it checks and balances, but basically designed to keep major changes from going through. Dr. Yaron Brook has said a couple of times, and I agree that, you should be careful when, all politicians are, as a majority, agreeing on anything. So, and I have to tell you, Razi, again, from an American's perspective and from an investor's perspective, I'm looking at a lot of something good is happening in Israel. I don't know if you guys can see this. These are some of the ETFs that track Israeli stocks, and they're just friggin' taking off. So, Razi, it was so interesting when you said, some terrible things happening in Israel. From an investor's perspective, doesn't look like that. And even from an American's perspective, don't you welcome the idea of divided government? Because that means government can do less when it comes up with, kind of cockamamie, harebrained schemes.
Yeah, so I actually, about an hour ago, spoke to an Israeli friend, and we discussed that, because in Israel, one of the complaints that you hear often, at least from the talking heads, is that these elections are so expensive. And I was telling him on this call, and I told him in previous elections that this is this is the cheapest thing that can happen. Like, this is the least expensive. It's way more expensive when members of parliament are working, because what they do is spend money that isn't theirs, that somebody else earned. So I agree with you on that. But yeah, this gridlock is there literally is no government. I mean, there's some sort of whatever was the last government is kind of still in power, but they can't they basically have a very difficult time doing anything. So in many ways that's good. In some ways, especially in a place like Israel, there's a downside to it. Remember, Israel is in a perpetual lifeboat situation. It's surrounded by enemies. It it's it has concerns that other places don't have. So, but to a very large extent, I agree with you.
And let me again, I mean, let me jump in quickly, very briefly, from again, kind of an American perspective. And thank you, Mary Aline asks, why is there so much innovation in Israel? And I think it's worth emphasizing. What differentiates Israel is a lot of things, not just the political advancement, but that technological advancement. Razi, Dr. Brook mentioned something on one of his recent podcasts at all. He mentioned that, childbirth in Israel is dramatically higher than anywhere else around the world. He posited that the reason is that Israel is more optimistic about the future. There's a younger generation of Israelis, I think, being influenced a lot about the work you're doing and the work you've done in Europe writ large, about an optimistic view of the future, a positive view, a capitalist view of the future. And Israel, isn't at risk really as it was, certainly in the 70s, when it almost lost a war against its foreign enemies. So despite all this confusion in the parliament and all this confusion in the Israeli government, Israel is doing something right, isn't it?
Well, I like that optimistic view. I don't necessarily share it. I think one of the reasons people are having so many kids in Israel is because government pays them more the more kids they have, and that's one of the influences of the ultra-Orthodox Jews having so much power and working in parliament. By the way, with the the Islamists, and that's okay. A weird coalition, but they both want more child benefits from the government. So I think there's that. Now, on Marilyn's question, well, a big part of it is because that is a cultural, that's the part of the culture in Israel. You have to be successful, and it's not necessarily, for the right reasons. I think it's Israel's form of tribalism. It's definitely better than, other forms of tribalism, in that people at least, get to produce stuff that is valuable to humans. But I've said this half jokingly in the past, when I was really shocked by how in the UK there's such a focus on the poor and the supposedly downtrodden and so on. And I said, being successful in Israel is held in almost as high regard as being unsuccessful is in the UK. So that, I think, that is a part of the reason why there's so much innovation going on.
So let me ask you something else, gentlemen. So most of us, the outsiders, when we think about Israel, and particularly about the Israeli right, two figures come to mind when it comes to the last, let's say, decades. The one is Ariel Sharon, the other is Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. And what we have in our mind is that these are the hawks. These are the people who, in some ways, are, to use it the conventional way, extremists. And these are the people who are very aggressive in when it comes to the foreign policy of Israel. Now, what struck me is that when I talk to you, Razi, you tell me that this is definitely not the case, and that Netanyahu is definitely overrated. So the question is this: what has been the stance of the Israeli right towards the Palestinian question? How it relates to the rest of the political spectrum in Israel, and also why you, Razi, are a lot skeptical when it comes to Netanyahu as someone who understands the vital interests of Israel and is someone who is able to have a principled foreign policy. And by the way, how does he come that he wins the elections and he's such a good survivor as a politician?
So Netanyahu is. You said he. I think he's overrated. Well, I think he's overrated in maybe the American right. I don't think in Israel he's overrated. I think in Israel people have called his bluff a long time ago. It's just that there is nobody else. Like they're all so bad, and the parties that are supposedly to the right of him sit in coalitions with him. Criticize his policies that they support. And so that's kind of how politics works in Israel. You have a coalition government, you have partners in that government criticizing a government that they're a part of in ways that if that happened, if the Secretary of State in the US criticized America's foreign policy, they would no longer be the Secretary of State. That doesn't make any sense. But in Israel, that's a regular part of the system because they have different parties. They usually, by the way, historically, it was stable enough that, elections are supposed to take place every 4 years. They usually take place around like 3.5 years because, half a year before one of the parties pulls out of the coalition and say, we're going to stand up for our principles. So, we're only going to sit with these guys for 3.5 years rather than 4. So, who you can trust in the next election. But it's that's the thing. There's the people on the so-called right in Israel who actually think that who say that Israel should pursue a more aggressive defense policy, say it when they're not in power, sometimes say it when they are in power while voting for other things. And nobody actually is prepared to do that. So
I'll just briefly jump in that, Razi, I appreciate as someone who, from Israel and born there, and you're very tuned into it, but I'll just share. This is, you can see this is me. Is it Masada? Top of Masada?
That's close enough. Yeah.
Masada. I see Israel as a great investment opportunity. I see it, I think, as Ayn Rand did, as a real shining beacon in the Middle East. Its economy demonstrates that. I mean, it is a huge global hub for innovation. And I'm much more optimistic than you are, Razi, for the future for Israel. I mean, I think, it's part of why the work you're doing, I think, is so influential, and why I think the liberty movement writ large, you've had a lot of the stars of that movement here on your program on the Daily Objectives. So, I think one has to be bullish on Israel. Ayn Rand saw that. Go back and, listen to some of those Donahue interviews where she analyzed the situation in the Middle East. I mean, her prediction is Israel is, these are my words now, kind of really the only beacon of light in this cesspool of collectivism. I think it's playing out. And it even sounds like some of the worst parts of Israel. I mean, I remember I was there for Boaz Ender's Freedom Conference a couple of years ago. There's even talk of ending the draft there. That's a huge bullish step for capitalism, for individualism in what is the most capitalist and individualist country in the Middle East. So I'm a bull in Israel, despite I know what you see from a very narrow perspective as being political mess.
By the way, something also for some viewers who might not know our take on Israel and Palestine, for example. Okay, I won't say our view because we might disagree with each other, but the big picture is we believe that not even specifically sometimes for the individual Palestinians who want to live a good life, a fulfilling life, getting over this tribalism in the Middle East and realizing that what they should be looking forward is not a different state where they have fewer rights that they would have in another state, but actually a state which respects everyone's rights, irrespective of what is their background, would be the best solution. So when we say, for example, that we morally, let's say, support Israel, this is not based on any ethnic or tribal point of view. It is based on, from the countries that are around the area, it is the country that respects individual rights more than other countries. Now, it's not doing...
Yeah, look, they got a friggin' sweet McDonald's, a bunch of them in Israel. I mean, this is when I've been there, it feels like, as a completely first world, developed, rational country with interesting people pursuing values, pursuing wealth. Whereas in so much of the other parts of the Middle East, that's just simply not the case. Sorry, Nikos, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, that was just a parenthesis, because we might have someone who watches first time and might think that, but what about the Palestinians and all that stuff? Anyway, that would take us hours. I'm just giving, let's say, the short view.
But Nikos, on that point, I've said in the past, a Palestinian who wants a better life will say to his his people, let's look at Israel and learn. Let's be like them. Let's work with them rather than let's bomb them and see if we can kill them all and throw them in the ocean. Or
Last point, Razi.
I did want to make a point on Jonathan's point. Yeah, when I left Israel in 2008, there was virtually no freedom movement. And yeah, what Boaz Arad has done with the Ayn Rand Center Israel and the new liberal movement is, it is amazing. I mean, it's, there's a member of parliament today who is, she's not a laissez-faire capitalist, but she's as close to it as I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I think closer than anybody ever before. There's a party by Libby Molad, who I don't know if she's planning to run. I'm hoping we'll have her on something on our channel at some point soon to discuss that. But there is some movement in that direction. My pessimism is just I don't think it'll happen fast enough, and I don't know how I don't know how you sway the ultra orthodox, the people who really are, convinced that their imaginary friend has sent them on a mission. And I was watching Israeli news last night because there's an election, and there was some massive demonstration, and these people they're insane. There's no talking to such people and convincing them to think about their life on earth as their highest value. So
I have two parting thoughts. The first is that unfortunately Greece has only one good Giannis to send to Israel, and it's the one that has changed the fate of Maccabi in basketball. But please don't take our other Giannis, who is Varoufakis, because that's not good news for your economy. So there's so much help we can offer Israel. The other thing is that I think today became clear that Razi needs to be more often on the show, and that although he's became known as the Lord Emperor behind the scenes, he has also things to offer on the forefront. So, gentlemen, any parting thoughts?
Well, I'll briefly just say, I mean, Israel, I think, is got a huge, bright future ahead of us, ahead of it. And even as an American, I've had such great fun going there. It's going to become post-COVID a regular family tradition. As I said, I've been there 4 times. I think in the last, I guess now 6 years, there's such to explore there. That's not just kind of the old world, but the new world as well. All the explosions. I mean, the skyscrapers there. I mean, the food. So just been great fun. So
the medical innovation that we all benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an investor as well, there's a lot of money that's been made in Israel, and I think will continue to be made in Israel, not because the water is any different there than anywhere else in the Middle East, but because the ideas. That's what we're doing here every day at the Ayn Rand Center UK, trying to promote those exact ideas. And we appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate my co-host for welcoming here today.
Well, the water in Israel is holy, as you know, Jonathan, so it is different. But yeah, Nikos, I appreciate the compliment, but no, the only way I can, the elections in Israel are on Tuesdays as well. So the only way you'll see me regularly is if we do election Tuesday every Tuesday, but I don't think we're going to lose all our audience if we do that. So, but yeah, I will be back because I think this is something we'll cover a few more times, if not on the Daily Objective, then on some separate special show on YouTube, because it is important. I do think Israel is important, not just, for me because I came from there and have family and friends there, but it is important in the grand scheme of things. It is this sort of, as Jonathan said, a beacon of hope in the Middle East, where it's the only one. It's the only hope in the Middle East. So
Okay. So many thanks to both of you. Today, for the first time, I managed to also engage with the chat. So I see it's good fun. I see why other co-hosts are doing it. And many thanks to Marilyn for the super chat.
Yes.
So thanks to everyone. Thanks to our viewers. Hope you all have a good time. And
wait, Nikos, if people, because this was like 25 minutes, if people want more of our live content, is there anything they should know about?
yes, there is, but you know more about it. So why don't you tell us?
So at 7 p.m. UK time, which is 33 minutes from now, we will have James Valiant back on to discuss Ayn Rand's essay, Philosophy and Sense of Life. So yeah, that'll start at 7. It'll go on for as long as it'll go on, 1 to 2 hours. And yeah, I hope you join us for that.
Thank you, Razi. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.